Hello, everybody. How's it going? Happy Friday to all of you, and happy holidays. Today, we're going to be talking to Elizabeth Carey Smith. She is a returning guest on the show. Some interesting things have happened to Elizabeth. She started as a freelancer and worked most of her life that way, and then she went full-time in-house on the brand side. And we don't have many people that we talk to that are actually on the brand side. And as of Monday next week, she's going to be returning to the freelance world. So this has been like a round trip. I don't know exactly what we're going to talk about, but I know it's going to be on the subject of going freelance to full-time, what it's like to manage a large team, and how to deal with brand guides and consistency and things like that. Elizabeth, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Hey, guys.
You look great, by the way.
Thank you.
Fresh from a jiu-jitsu sparring session, yeah?
Yeah, I'm kind of beat right now, like literally. But I'm good. I'm good. One of the things I'm looking forward to with going back to working for myself is more time for jiu-jitsu.
The priorities are in order. Yeah.
It doesn't pay any money, but it is really good for my mental state, which helps.
Okay. Can we do a high-level overview in case somebody's tuning in? Maybe they're on the freelance side and they're thinking about going in-house, or in-house and they're thinking about getting out, or just wondering what this is like. Can you give us some of the high-level, we're going to be talking about 2 or 3 things here, and then we'll dive deep into it?
Sure. I haven't been brand side a whole lot during my career. I've either, as you said, worked freelance, kind of gun for hire stuff, or just had my own studio. And I've worked at agencies and studios. Brand side, as a lot of people know, is a really different situation. And part of the reason I took this job, when we talked last time, I was like, I don't see myself working full time again for somebody else. Yeah. But one of the things that drew me into this job was a colleague of mine who I worked on the NBA rebrand with said before he opened his own studio, he wanted to go work for a big organization first for a couple of years, because that was going to be the best way for him to understand his own clients if he had that experience working, on the client side. Mm-hmm. And I had not thought about it really like that before. And that piece of advice resonated over and over again while I was brand side. So I'm very glad that I did it. I learned a ton that I would never have learned on my own. So there was that. But I was there for about 20 months, which I thought was like a decent amount of time. I didn't want to get sucked into the mentality of in-house, which is it's a very different pace. It's very different expectations. It's very different daily work. So I thought I would come on here today because it's such a different 180 from where I was before and what I'm heading back into, and I'm really glad that I've had this chance to learn something about working for a brand. Mm-hmm.
So I've not worked in-house for very long, so I'm gonna have to just turn over the show to you and just tell us what you've learned. What are the highlights, the lowlights, and everything in between? And just to let everybody know, when you went in-house on the brand side, you working for a large bank?
Yeah, a big bank.
Big bank.
It's a bank for other banks. So it's not even a retail. Yeah. They're actually the bank of the U.S. government.
Wow.
Yeah. So all of these things were kind of compelling to me because I very much like doing design in places where it's not expected. And one of the big things about wanting to try this was, if you think about financial institutions, like what they look like, just think about ads or your experience walking into a bank or bank commercials on TV. They're not really known for their design. They're not known for their visuals. You see a lot of kind of stock photography. You see a lot of pictures of smiling people in front of a house or something like that. And a lot of it doesn't feel very smart. It doesn't feel very compelling. it feels like stock photos.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I thought was, here's this industry that has a ton of money, all the money, literally has all the money. And they don't use those resources to message in a way that they could, that other kinds of brands, consumer brands, are always trying to find budgets to communicate messages on this like deeper level or more interesting level or beautiful level, whatever. And I just thought, if I could get a big budget and I could convince some people to make financial work look better, that's a really good design challenge. So I kind of started off with that in mind. And I can see the silver lining in all kinds of projects. That doesn't have to be like this cool Adidas campaign with Pharrell. Like, yeah, of course, that's going to be a cool project, but like, it's going to be a cool project no matter what. You know what I mean? Trying to make something cool that is inherently not cool is more of a challenge. And I think there's a lot more designers than you think who are trying to do that every day.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Does the banks want to be cool?
No, they don't care.
Okay. Just checking.
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
That was the first part. But what I started to try to convince them of was they understood that there were some flaws in their brand perception. They understood that they're trying to attract people to come work there who are very smart and innovative and tech forward. And that can be hard to do when you have no visuals to kind of show that your brand is those things. So even on an employee retention and attraction level, it was important for them. They started to see the importance of trying to be a little more compelling as a brand. It's a very sleepy brand, but they did want to communicate the fact that they're technologically future forward, and they wanted to attract better younger people to come work in some of the departments. So that's where I started, and it was such a hard sell. It's unbelievable. What I realized is that you're dealing with two really difficult things that you don't always deal with in other contexts. One, you're dealing with people who have no imagination. It's not part of how they think. It's not, and they're super smart people. It's not about that. It's just their brains are different. So they have no imagination. And by nature of the job, they're risk averse. So those two things make it very hard to sell in something that they haven't seen before. So that was probably like the biggest eye-opening thing. What I did end up selling them on is an idea of sophistication, and that something that I've always said, things that are complex shouldn't be run away from. And you shouldn't try to make complex things simple. You should try to make complex things clear. And they saw that. They saw that there was an importance to not decontextualizing their work or dumbing down what they were doing for their clients. Their clients could understand what they did. They needed better ways to communicate what they did. So all of those things started to work into this idea of the brand perception that I was pushing for. So I did kind of get away with it for a while.
Okay.
With the help of some big budgets, which was great.
Wait. Can I ask you for context? Yeah. What's the big budget?
So we did a 2-day still life shoot I think we did 6 or 8 shots over 2 days, and it was $40,000. You
hired a photographer to do the shoot?
Mm-hmm.
The budget was $40K?
Yeah, I hired a photographer I would not have otherwise been able to afford. And I hired a photographer who had never done financial things before. Mm-hmm. And I did everything. My approach was the same as it would have been for a fashion client or anything else. But I was applying it to the financial world. One of the other things that was kind of easy to sell them on is people are looking around them, looking at consumer goods, looking at startup ads on the subway, and more that those are the visuals that people relate to, or those are the visuals that are communicating to audiences. If you don't keep up with that, people won't be able to communicate with your brand on the same level. So a lot of this, they were like, okay, we're going to let you try this, because they could, as I said, they couldn't imagine it.
Okay. People are just in shock right now. Kyle's like, did I hear that right? $40,000 for 6 pictures? What? It's true. So I'm already writing down one thing that you're mentioning. You transitioned from freelance to on going full time on the brand side, and you happen to pick a Whopper, the bank to banks. And one of the benefits is you have the resources theoretically to be able to work with people you normally, as Elizabeth Carey Smith, could not normally afford in your everyday life, because the clients that you may work with, probably that's a big number to swallow, right?
Yeah. For that. I mean, when I was in fashion, we were trying to squeeze in 16 shots a day, which is, no photographer wants to hear that.
Right.
But we would try to do it, and those were with models, not even like still life. So, money is a different thing for banks. It's not to say that they don't have budgets and they're not conscious of those things. They absolutely are. But they also understand that that brand is massive. It's a global brand, 56,000 employees all over the world.
Wow.
So I went from working alone or before that, a startup of 6 people, to working for this giant corporation. And I definitely dove in blind. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. I think I re-energized a lot of things about the team and the process and the way that people were looking at our brand. And I'm sure I made a ton of mistakes. I went from working alone, as I said, to overseeing the creative for 22 in-house designers who, up to that point, were pretty, fine with just using templates and doing kind of the same thing over and over again. And I was like trying to get out of them why they were designers to begin with, trying to go back to like what they loved. And I think for some people it helped, and then some people I just pissed off.
Sure. I have to ask you a question. So you're doing your thing, independent person. Somewhere along the way you get recruited, or however that conversation begins. And in the interview process, I'm just curious, like, because you said that you kind of went into it blind, like they didn't tell you the challenges ahead of time, or they didn't tell you why they wanted you to come in, or am I not understanding that? Can you shed some light on that? Because I think that's going to be very illuminating for our audience who may want to go on the inside. So take us through that whole courtship process and what that was like.
Yeah, I as I said, had no intention of going full time. I met with the head of marketing there, who was in charge of our department, as a favor to someone I was on the board of the Type Directors Club with. I said, I'm not interested in work like that. And he said, I know you're not, but they really want someone who has a typography background, who's worked in fashion, who's worked in arts organizations. And I just thought, that sounds like you. And I said, yeah, I have no experience in the financial world. And he said, that's what they want. So I started off with somebody who recognized that she wasn't getting what she wanted out of designers who did have experience in the financial world. So she wanted a new approach. So a big part of that, if somebody is considering going brand side, is finding somebody who can fight the fights for you. Because if you have no sway in that organization, they may not listen to you. And so when I went in there, just as a courtesy, I had no intention of taking the job. And in fact, after I met with them, I said, thanks, but no thanks, on the spot. Like, I said, I'm not interested in this. Interesting challenge, but it's not for me. And she courted me for a while, like several months. And so I ended up doing a little freelance job for them. And I thought, this isn't so bad. Like, I thought this was going to be really limiting creatively, but it wasn't. She kind of let me do what I thought was right and trusted my instincts. And so they kind of became a freelance client immediately. And I thought, great, who doesn't need a bread and butter client? And then she said, well, it's a lot easier to just, if you could be in the office. And I was working from home for a long time. And I thought, yeah, that's fine. I can go into an office and have a change of scenery. And so I started off there like 2 days a week, and then it was 3 days a week. And we started catching the attention of higher ups with what we were doing, because while we were technically using the brand guidelines, the logo, the colors, the fonts, what we were making with it was completely different from what they had been seeing. So they said, what would you do with the brand? If you could, what's the problem with the brand? And I just had at it. It's like, I've been doing branding for years, and this isn't sufficient, the way that you've kind of designed brand guidelines. That was one thing that I learned really quickly. Like, oh, there's all these people who work in agencies or work in studios, and they're making brand guidelines, rebranding organizations, and they're not really they're not thinking about some things that are really coming to mind now that I've got to use somebody else's brand guidelines. The first thing is like giving somebody a logo, a color palette, and fonts doesn't tell you what that brand should look like or what it should feel like. And you're opening the door to a lot of different stuff that isn't going to feel like the same brand. So as demonstrated by what I was doing with it, which was totally different from what they were used to. I also banned stock photography.
Ooh.
Yeah. I was like, well,
this is a new dictator is here.
Yeah, I went over real well.
Right. I'm sure you did. 22 people are like, let's see how long you last.
Well, I lasted.
I know you did. Yes, you did.
But I said, there's a lot of other ways we can approach this without relying on stock photography. Here's my issue with stock photography in the financial world. One, what they do there is not tangible. There's nothing that you can photograph. It's things that are happening on screens, So using a stock photo of a guy in a kayak going down a river is relying on a visual metaphor that makes no sense. So the other problem is that, and I'm kind of fine with calling it out here because I'll call out any brand who does this, using stock photography of women of color because you know that your brand should portray women of color when you don't have women of color leading that organization at all. You just have a bunch of white dudes is not okay. So I told them that in the annual report meeting. We're not using photos that represent your brand that are disingenuous. And I kind of got them there. They're like, yeah, okay, we can see that. So what we ended up doing was we did a shoot that had that was just for one campaign. And then we worked to make different vector patterns and really, really, really just go hard on pushing typography. And it was crazy, like how much you can do with type to define a brand that is mostly communicated through words. Like that's kind of the best way forward. So that was fun and interesting and a tough challenge because that's not everybody's forte. I obviously have super high standards for type, but along the way I gave lots of type lessons, and I think people liked that, and they tended to respond pretty well to those things.
Okay, I want to talk about the type lessons, but I do want to clarify something here. I just want to clarify something. Elizabeth, you're not saying don't use people of color. You're just saying if the organization is this, don't misrepresent yourself. So if it was all Asians and you put a bunch of white people in it, that would feel wrong to you as well. Or if the organization was all people of color and you put in all white people, it's just about being true to who you are. And so if you want to put out that image out there into the universe that you are a diverse group, we'll be a diverse group first, and then we'll reflect that, right? Okay.
Very well said.
Great, because some people they're going to misinterpret that, and it's like I don't want them to misinterpret what you're saying.
Listen, I would have loved. I'd probably still be at that company if it were run by a bunch of women of color, because I think it would have been a very different organization. Mm-hmm. But I think that exploiting the moment of understanding that diversity is important and yet not taking the actions, is wrong.
Okay, there's a good question here in the chat that I have to bring up. So we have to give them credit too that you coming in and saying we're not going to do that, they heard you. Some organizations would say shut up and do your job, right?
Sure.
Okay. Or no? Do they get credit or no?
I mean, yeah, they heard me. They heard me. I mean, they said, that's fine. If you have some better solution that doesn't cost us a ton of money.
Oh, okay. It came down to money again.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, at a bank, it's always going to come back to money.
It's kind of weird. Banks just think about money all day. Okay, this is a really good question that's coming in from Marlene Coro, who's like, how did you get them to listen? Can you replay that conversation for us? Like how you phrased it, your approach? Was there a strategy? And don't tell me you put an arm bar on them, because it's not going to work for a lot of people.
It didn't work. I didn't do any jits moves on anybody.
That's good.
There were a lot. I mean, there were many conversations over the course of the, almost 2 years I was there. And they happened in different contexts. The ones with about not using pictures of diverse people to misrepresent your brand happened in the context of the annual report. I had last year's annual report that had, 2 people of color on the cover. And I was offended by it.
Okay.
And so, they're not, they weren't unreasonable. I mean, the funny thing about it is that financial people also aren't trying to be creative people.
Yeah.
More than other clients I've worked with, they don't really have, they don't really want to butt in and give an opinion on stuff. I mean, what the biggest thing I would fight is when people would say, that doesn't feel like our brand. And I would say, right, we don't want it to feel like the current brand perception. We want to push that. We want it to feel like an iteration. The brand is 236 years old. So it's something that's going to have to evolve. And it's hard to make a heritage brand feel future forward. So I would just keep bringing it back to how is your brand perceived today? What is the legacy of your brand? And how do we make it feel attractive for right now, for 2019? In terms of other things, when designers would kind of rely on stock photography, I would do what I do with my students, and I would just push critically. What are you trying to say? What is this a metaphor for? And does that do that better than something else? And so I just kept pushing with that. What we would end up doing a lot of times is using collage, because I thought collage is something that's not in the space, really. Mm-hmm. It allows you to use some visual metaphors while not relying on one particular thing that would make it weak. And it made things feel more contemporary. We took a lot of inspiration from editorial illustration, because those illustrations tend to be trying to convey something kind of complex. If you look at stuff in The Atlantic or Politico or the New York Times, those illustrations are often trying to convey something that's kind of a complex idea. And that was what our challenge was too. We have complex ideas that we're trying to convey. So how do you do that? in a compelling way that isn't kind of cheesy. So that was a lot of the conversations. And then a lot of the conversations were about clarity and how typography can serve you better than photos sometimes.
Okay, great. You guys probably have a ton of questions about how Elizabeth has, what she's learned, how she transitioned in and potentially now, not potentially, eventually out back into the real world in terms of the world of freelance. And go ahead and ask your questions there. I'll do my best to read them. I want to get into your background serving on the board of on the Type Directors Club, designing that type hat that I wear, right? That was your design?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you guys, I should have worn that hat today.
I'll see if I can. Is it in here in the office?
I don't think so, Jonah.
Oh, okay.
I can go get mine.
Yeah, well, I don't want to mess up your hair. You look great, by the way. So if you want to, she designed that type hat that you guys see me wear so often. And that's one connection. There's other connections here. But sitting on the board, having somebody else say, hey, you know your type and you do know your type. And I would love to just dive deeper because a lot of people underestimate the power of like really beautiful typography. And when you said like sometimes type can be better and more impactful than images, and especially if you don't want to buy stock or commission photography, this is a good thing. So let's talk about the things that you've learned in your life or you've imparted on the 22 designers that worked under you. Like what kinds of things would you tell them about?
Well, it was different for different designers because some people were interested and some people weren't. But one of the challenges that we were facing was that the brand desperately needed to be, I thought, scrapped and redone because it wasn't very good to begin with. And as I said, we had the components of brand guidelines, but nothing else. And so what I was trying to do was in the absence of what it should feel like, having some definitive answer, I said, go nuts. You've got this color palette. You've got these fonts. What are you going to do with them? How can we push this as far as we can? And we pushed it in all kinds of directions in the hopes that we would land on something that everyone could start to go, okay, this is what we feel like. And we had the luxury of doing that because a lot of the things were internal that we were doing. So the brand consistency didn't necessarily need to stay there. So we had a lot of leeway in terms of experimentation that, a brand that was more money conscious, cost conscious or something, or time conscious, wouldn't have had the luxury to kind of sit and explore. So one of the things, was like, yes, we have this font. If you start pulling that font apart into different geometric shapes and start reconstructing it, what kind of textures can you make? What does scale do to help the hierarchy of what you're trying to say or do? The cover of the annual report the year I did it was just typography. It was like perfectly spaced, aligned, tight, rich typography. I changed the paper stock to be matte. I did a gloss varnish on some of the types so that it looked so simple and yet like infinitely more sophisticated and contemporary, even though we were just using like this beautiful Publico light by Commercial Type. What are all the pieces of that? So really looking at type as image was a big thing that we tried to explore.
Those are really cool. You mentioned using collage and now type as image. This seems pretty progressive for a bank, I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, I'm go big or go home.
Right. Right. Did they approve some of these things?
They approved most of it.
That's awesome.
We were always in trouble for it, but it was kind of like what it says, shoot first, ask questions last. And luckily, I'm a fighter in general. So
Yes, you are.
I was willing to sacrifice a lot of things in order to do good work because I wasn't there to do mediocre work. I wasn't, I had no interest in doing that. And I also had an ally in my boss, who was the one who realized we needed better work. She didn't want to do mediocre work either. So, and she's a fighter too. She was willing to, got herself onto the executive committee and made friends with the right people on the business side. And she played a lot of roles in terms of shopping things around and telling people what we were going to do, or what do you think of this, so that people felt included and also could be excited about what we were doing. I could jump in when we would tag team in meetings and tell them what this was supposed to feel like and how they could engage with it. And she would just, we'd just kind of tag team until we got our way. And I mean, it didn't always go well, and we didn't win every fight by any means. But eventually we were asked to, and this is how I ended up with 22 designers we were asked to work with corporate on really rethinking a rebrand in general. So ultimately it worked out pretty well in terms of exploring that brand. We did not end up doing a rebrand. They've since done a brand refresh that I wasn't part of, and that was fine. So
I have a follow-up question for you. When you said, and sometimes we would get in trouble, what does trouble look like when you get in it? Long pause. How I interpret your face right now is, what can I say on air and what can't I say, or no?
No, I guess everyone there was very kind, and it's an old institution. And so they were used to doing things a certain way. But they got a new strategy director in while I was there. And I was so excited about him because in his first kind of town hall meeting, he said, I think the thing that attracts a lot of people to this brand is its potential, the possibility of what you could do with this brand, because of our clients, because of our age, because it was started by Alexander Hamilton. There's a lot to it, and it seemed like there was a lot of untapped potential. And I was so excited about a director of strategy, coming to us with this idea of being excited about the brand. That said, there are a lot of people who came to that brand because they wanted to be somewhere where the boat wasn't rocking. They wanted to be somewhere that was stable, and they could punch in, they could punch out, and just go with the flow. And so us kind of constantly shaking things up, wasn't always well received. And I understand why. I totally understand why. I would often say, like, I understand that I'm being difficult. I understand that you don't want this. But this is what I'm going to try to do. Okay.
Did you? I want some details here. Did somebody call you in a room like, hey, Elizabeth, I know you want to do this, but it's not going to happen? Or was it like, hey, man, you're barking up the wrong tree. Stop doing that.
Yeah, it was that.
It was.
It was a lot of that. It was also like, they would kind of go, okay, we let you do certain things. Like I said, the CEO needs a new headshot. So I got my friend, who's a photographer, Michael Levine, who shot, Nirvana and Sonic Youth and Soundgarden and Courtney Love. And he's just become this he was a music photographer, shot Biggie, that famous photo of Biggie standing in the cemetery. He shot that. And I got him to come in and shoot the CEO and a lot of the C-suite. And they were like, why? And I was like, because we're trying something new. And so they were like, okay, we'll do this. And then they would go, look, we've given you this. Now just relax for a few weeks. Like, stop rocking the boat as often as you possibly can. Or, yes, we understand what you're trying to do, but that's just too much for our brand. It's too much of a leap. And they were probably not wrong, but it's kind of like, it's the pendulum, right? Like, if somebody's got to be pushing it real hard in order for it to come back to the center.
Very interesting approach. Okay. Interesting. Okay. I'm trying to listen to this through the eyes of the designer who's with you, and also from the eyes of management. Like, what are we doing here? Who hired this girl? What's going on? Like, why are we changing everything? Why is she in my face all the time about pushing the pendulum? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You got, I guess you win one and then you give one, maybe, where you got to hire your friend who's real edgy, who's going to bring some energy. How did the photo turn out? Because sometimes it's like, I do work with photographers too, and their body work is great. And then you put them in front of like a middle-aged white man, and it's like, there's only so far you could take that. I mean, did they bring something new? Was it worth it for you to like win that battle?
Yeah, what it was it brought a level of quality. It wasn't about making him, the CEO, look cool. It was about making him look important, because he was, and somebody who shoots famous people for a living knows how to make important people look important.
Oh,
so that was kind of my angle with it,
Okay. Oh, I want to talk about this.
Very relaxed in front of the biggest, anybody.
Superstars.
He knows how to get that out of his subjects. And that's what I wanted, because corporate CEO kinds of people are stiff.
Yeah.
And I mean, most people are, like, in front of a camera. And I needed somebody who could get more energy, as you said, out of it, and in a level of quality in the color and in the composition that we were going for.
So can you share with us some of the things that your friend Michael Levine?
Michael Levine.
Michael Levine used to, this could be a takeaway for anybody on how to like help people ease up in front of the camera or anywhere else. What kinds of tricks or techniques did Michael use? I'm curious.
I remember him saying, because he understands that all famous people, all important people, all rich people are just human beings.
Yeah.
And there's some mundane thing that you can do to start to get them chatting about things. And he had such a calm demeanor, and he was shooting while he was talking. He said, "Where do you live?" And guys like, Upper West Side. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I used to have an apartment up there back in the 90s, whatever." And they just started chatting as human beings. And it allowed the guy to breathe, to relax, to understand that this wasn't someone who was going to, he wasn't allowing him to focus on the fact that there was a camera in his face. Mm-hmm. He was making him think about something else. So I thought that was, I've worked with him many times. He taught me how to art direct. So, which is mostly have a vision in your head of what you want to get, communicate that to the photographer, and then get the hell out of their way.
Okay. So building rapport, making the relationship less formal, like your subject, I'm photographer, getting to know them, and to small talk just to get them to loosen up, because I think you want to capture them. I mean, this is true to what you said before, in a more natural, relaxed state versus this is true to who you are versus who you think you want to be to the world. Yeah. So I have a question then. You hired your friend. He's good. He makes them relax, captures them. And do they also see the difference in the work, or they're like, whatever, made no difference, or I hate it?
I think that he was happy with it. I think they all were. We shot a bunch of the higher level executives, and I think they were pleased with how Michael made them feel.
Yeah.
And he shot a lot, and he is amazing with light, which is obviously everything with photography.
Right.
I think they were excited to see that, he wasn't trying to make them look like rock stars. He was trying to capture the best he could out of them and make them look important. So yeah, I think they were happy with, the guys who kind of ran the whole annual report project, I ran into them in the hallway, and they were like, "You gonna work on it again?" And I was like, "No, I'm leaving." But they liked the process. I brought them in to what we were doing and what we were trying to accomplish, and I let them be part of it. I think that's a big part of being creative director, is that you need to make people feel heard if they have opinions, and you have to make people comfortable with what you're going to show them, what you're going to do.
So you bring in a pretty radical choice in terms of their eyes as somebody to collaborate with. they're probably resistant, reluctant, and then you do it and it turns out well and they're happy. Does that win you points so that the next time, like, you remember that time we had that disagreement and you went with it, you gave me a little trust and I returned it? Does that build in as a person who's working on the brand side? Because I would imagine every time you do one that's right in their eyes, you rise in esteem. It's like, I don't know why we're fighting Elizabeth. Just let her do it because she always does the right thing. Does that work like that or no?
Well, I certainly don't always do the right thing. I'm especially when you're like exploring what you can do. You definitely find yourself going like, "Oh, nope, reverse out of that. That's not going to work, or that's not going to have legs." From a brand perspective. Both things add up. The times that I annoy them, and the times that I give them a win. So I think, our CMO is a wonderful lady, but she was just like, whoa, what is happening? Like, you're all over the place. At the same time, they recognized that across the board, the brand was floundering. They couldn't understand why, because it's not their job to kind of dissect this stuff. And when I could just dissect it for them and tell them, your primary brand color is gold. It's a spot color metallic that doesn't ever look good on the screen. That doesn't ever print well off of an internal, Xerox printer. There are easy fixes to some of this stuff, but you have to be willing to, scrap certain things. And that it was when I would talk about scrapping things that they were like, well, we've had this for a long time. And people are invested in it. And I'm like, right, they're invested in the wrong thing. Throw it out. It's garbage.
Yeah.
That's stacked against me too.
Give us 1 second. Some people are saying there's an audio problem.
I hear it on my end.
We hear it all. No, it's not you. It's probably, if anything, it's us. One person saying they can't hear, but everybody else seems to be able to hear. Okay, everybody's good. Let's just keep going. Wow, I have a lot of questions for you. My goodness. All right. Okay. Where do I begin here? Okay, you said that obviously going from a one-person shop mostly to being now responsible for 22 creatives. Did you get to hire people? Did you have to fire people? Can you talk about what that's like as being somebody who's in charge of a bunch of creative people?
That's hard. I was co-creative director at that point with another woman who had already been in charge of them. So what she did was she did project intake, she did the human resources aspect of things, and then all their creative was coming past my desk to look at and see what we were going to evolve, what needed to change. I'm marking up edits and trying new things. So I don't ever want to fire anybody. I don't want to mess with somebody's income, So what I tried to do, my boss asked to see everybody's resumes, which naturally made them nervous.
That would make people nervous. Jonah, I need to see your resume after this.
Yeah. One guy had been there since I was 6 years old.
Wow.
And I was like, I hate me too right now. Like, I really do. What I was trying to get at with looking at their resumes was, did you start out as a photographer, or do you really love type, or do you, what is your strength? And then I can assign that to where we need it. We've got 22 designers. Not everybody needs to have the same skill set.
Right.
Not everybody has to have the same, responsibilities. And I had them do a little exercise, like just sky's the limit. What would you do? Kind of thing. And, in hindsight, I wish I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I was thinking, how did that go over? Okay, this is interesting.
I wasn't trying to test them, but it came across that way.
It looks totally like a test. Like, we have work to do, and you're going to give us a test?
Yeah. And I wasn't trying to test them. I think I was trying to understand what kind of designers they were outside of the confines of this brand, this problematic brand guideline, Yeah. so I understood that people were like, who are you? Like, go away, and I'd never managed that many people like that before. I'd never managed people who, had been there for, they'd had the same job for so long. I was stirring things up, I think, in a way that was like not well received. What I was trying to do was to offer a perspective and get their perspective back. I was trying to create a dialogue, but I understood almost immediately that it was a threatening position that I was put in, but also, also trying to get something out of it that was not super successful. And so I got yelled at, like screamed at on the phone by one designer one day. And he was like,
a subordinate?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't care about that.
Okay. Hold on. So tell me about this.
I'm sorry. I have to plug my laptop in. One sec.
Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry.
All right. You guys, while she's plugging in her laptop, because we're running low on juice here, again, I'm going to let you guys know. Okay, who are we talking today? We're talking to Elizabeth Carey Smith. This is the second time she's been on the channel. So if you want to go and watch that video right here. I do this and they never put the link, but it'll be right here, Jonah. Jonah's on notice right now. If this link doesn't appear before your eyes, you can personally email Jonah Garcia. There it is. All right. So we're talking to Elizabeth Carey Smith, and she's been independent for a very long time and working with a lot of exciting brands. And then she gets asked to come in-house to a large bank with like 50,000 employees. This is the banks to other banks. It's an enormous corporation. And she was reluctant at first, but through some trial and error, not trial and error, just like a trial phase, she's like, let me try this. Let me give it a shot. They want to do something exciting. Let's do it together. So she's been inside the brand for some time now. I think, was it a year and a half, something like that? Maybe a little bit longer. Yeah. And then now she's about to go back into freelance again, but we're just trying to understand, like, what's it like to be a creative director inside a brand and the challenges that she has. So now you guys are all caught up. Welcome to the show. Okay. Are we good? You're plugged in? Okay. You got juice? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I have a lot of questions for you. We're talking about, before the break, the scream. One of your subordinates is now calling you and screaming. Screaming? Really screaming?
He was yelling at me.
Okay, tell me about that and tell me how you process that.
So he calls me up, and I can't remember what exactly he was pushing back on me about. I know what it was. He wanted to have another phone call about some feedback I'd given him. And I was like, we don't need a call, just do it. And I at that point was so overwhelmed with meetings and phone calls and trying to keep up with everybody's projects. And I didn't want to argue with him about changes that I thought were necessary. And, with just that as context, I'm still, that's what I stand by. But when he called me, he offered a new perspective, which is that, look, I've been working on this brand for 5 years or however long he'd worked there.
Right.
And you're not actually understanding, because, I was saying, like, I don't care what, the client says about, internal client. I don't care what they say about how they want it. They don't have any design opinion in this. Like, I don't care. Tell them to call someone else. Don't talk to you about it. And he was like, you don't understand. That's not how it works here. And I was like, well, that's how it's going to work here. And then he was like,
Yes. You're like, no, this is how it's going to work now.
I was just like, why are you asking the design opinion of somebody who has no idea what they're talking about? So he was like, that's not how we work. That's not our culture. These people care about this content. And I said, if they cared about that content, then they would have copy edited it, and then.
Oh, it got to a fight. You guys are fighting now. Oh yeah. Wow.
But after a while, I kind of he was like, you don't listen. And I was like, oh, do I not listen? And so I shut up.
Really?
Yeah. And I was like, I'm going to listen, but stop yelling at me. because I was shaking at this point.
Right.
And
I could only imagine.
One of my coworkers was listening to, he could hear my end of the call, and he was just like eating popcorn. Like, what?
Of course. I'm like, I don't have popcorn right now, but I'd be eating popcorn. Tell me more. How did this resolve?
And, what he was essentially saying was that I wasn't respecting the fact that I didn't walk into a blank canvas.
Yeah.
I walked into a thing that, there's more context to it, and that I should have not tried to change things overnight. And I should have, listened to what he had to say and offered better suggestions aside from tell that person to shut up. Because that was one of the big things where I'm like, right, well, when I'm working for myself, I just make decisions.
Right. That's a big,
correct. And I was like, well, I'm not taking the time to shop this around. I don't care. So
yes. Okay. This is a big difference. Yeah.
Being buds after that. But like the first thing, I hung up the phone. I went down to my boss's office and I was like, can you fire someone for me?
Really? You said that?
Yeah.
Wow.
She was like, who? And I gave her his name and she's like, all right. And then we talked to the other creative director about it and she was like, you guys both need to like, just chill. And she was right.
Okay.
Of course we need to chill. Like, I didn't need to mess with this guy's livelihood just because he had a context that I didn't feel like considering.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many things I want to talk to you about here. Okay. So you have been in the world kind of just, my idea is my idea. I do what I want. I don't have to onboard anybody. I don't have to convince anybody. You may have an argument with yourself sometimes, like, am I doing the right thing? The whole inner voice, right? But you've never had to explain to another human being because you're in charge of your life. Now you're like dropped into something that's completely different. Legacy, employees, brand equity, ways of working, corporate culture, so many different things. Okay, so I want to clarify a couple things, and I'm going to talk for a little bit, but please feel free to interrupt me, okay, Elizabeth? First of all, I had said a subordinate called you and said this, and somebody online said, that's rude to refer to that person as a subordinate. Literally, they are your subordinate. They report to you, and they have other people who report to them. It is a very, I'm going to say this to everybody that works in-house somewhere. You have to understand hierarchy and where you are. Imagine if you were the new employee, the intern who walked into the CEO's office like, let me tell you how to run a business. You'd be fired before you got back to your desk. Yeah. It doesn't even matter how good your idea is. Very rarely there is respecting chain of command and due process, and this is how you do things, especially in companies. And the person who is your senior has a lot of responsibilities that they may get fired for. So to talk to somebody like that, first of all, you should never yell at anybody, period, either up or down. But the fact that a subordinate is yelling up the chain, you are going to get fired. I'm sorry. You could be the best designer in the world, and they're going to miss your talent. They're going to miss your expertise, but you're going to get fired because now you've become very difficult. And I think it's rude for them to call you like that and demand that you listen. Now, I've had this happen to me. I'm going to tell you guys a personal story. It's going to get a little juicy. You guys want to get some popcorn and soda? Go ahead.
All right.
Here we go. I'm the boss. I'm the guy who signs a person's paycheck here, literally. And I had somebody who worked for me, pretty high level in the management structure. But he called me. First of all, he texted me and said, I need to talk to you. I'm like, okay, let's talk. I called. And you guys know me. Most of the times my demeanor is very calm, chill, even-keeled. And this guy was just, I asked him a few questions about the nature of an employee, and he went off the top. He just blew up. I'm like, woo. And I could feel the energy, the heat that you probably felt, Elizabeth. And I'm like, now I step outside my own body. I'm listening to this conversation like, Chris, where do we want to go with this? I snap back in. And luckily I had the state of mind to say to this person, and I said it like this, like a cold-blooded assassin. I said, I don't believe this conversation is going to be productive. I think you have a point of view that I can hear, but maybe not right now. My suggestion is to end this call before we both say something we're going to regret. I said it just like that. And here's what he said back to me. No, we're going to talk about it right now. I said, okay. And in my mind, I was thinking, I believe you just signed your death warrant, but let's continue. He said a few more things, and he also then realized this is a bad move for all kinds of reasons. I'm a reasonable person. I can hear lots of things. Most of them should not come in the envelope of punching me in the face. And when you do that, it's very hard to hear. And I'm a man. He's a man. So this was not a male-female thing at all. There are some people who just don't understand due process, and it is very disrespectful to speak to another human being like that. Back to you, Elizabeth.
It is, and I was kind of shocked. At the same time, I'm totally for, calling truth to power. Like, so I also respect a certain amount of that, because if someone's out of line, someone's out of line. I don't care who you are. And from his perspective, I was coming in and challenging all of these designers, and essentially, they were feeling like I was making them feel inferior, that they weren't good enough. This place wasn't Pentagram. I didn't have any right to expect that these people were the best in their field. You know what I mean? They were doing a perfectly fine job with the tools that they had. They had not been empowered to change anything in the past. It was just me and my boss who were the ones who were coming through with the bulldozer and going, we're going to change it. Up till then, they could have argued till they were blue in the face to do something that was a collage or typography, and they weren't given that power before.
Right.
So there was a whole perspective that he was trying to say to me, that I started to hear. Mm-hmm. And I was like, fine, I'm sorry. I've been a jerk. Don't ever talk to me like that again. But I hear you. Yeah. And, and he pulled through. Like, he wanted to learn. He took my edits after that and made changes, and he saw that there was an improvement, and he saw that the way that we were ramming through changes made things better, and it made his work look better. So, I don't know how he feels about me now. He probably still hates my guts. I don't really care about that much. But I hope that I think he learned from me, and that's probably the most important thing to me.
Mm-hmm. I have another question for you. This is a very complicated relationship. You have a co-creative director, and I was wondering, as they brought you in, the CMO brought you in and said, hey, everybody, welcome. This is your new boss on this part. And you weren't promoted from within. And so I have to think human nature is, I'm going to resent you. I'm going to sabotage you. I'm going to make this not work. I'm going to make your life hell if I can. Did you get that at all?
Not from her.
No, not from your co-creative director. Oh. I'm talking about everybody else. Like, why didn't we get promoted? Because sometimes that's a bad message to send internally. You give me 10 years of your life, we'll just bring in strangers to run the shop and tell you what to do. Totally.
Yeah. I would also feel the same way. I think that's a larger issue. Now people switch jobs, every year or two now in our industry. And I think a lot of that is because there's no room for growth for them. They're doing the same thing over and over again, and there's no way to get promoted. Like, there's a lot of shops that are just too small to accommodate, all these new design directors or senior designers. They have a system, they have a tiered situation, and there's no room for people to grow. And then you stick around thinking if you pay your dues, you're going to get one of the open slots eventually. That slot opens up and they get some flashy person from somewhere else. I get that.
Yeah.
I would have been annoyed.
Something I'd like to address here is that oftentimes the in-house team, and this is one of the challenges of in-house teams, and you said it in a way, that you don't necessarily expect the best designers or creatives or the thinkers to be in-house. And oftentimes that's a prejudice. Sometimes it's true, even within in-house, because our company for the last 23 plus years, we primarily work on accounts that are super exciting and fun, when we know very well, in fact, that oftentimes the clients that are hiring us have an internal creative team. Mm-hmm. So I always feel bad for them. I always feel bad. It's like, God, and it kind of sucks, because they give the best opportunities, the biggest budgets, the coolest things to external teams. What kind of advice could you give perhaps to somebody who's working in-house, one of those 22 plus people? What could you do to stand out? Like, now I know you're leaving, so It's cool. What could I do as an in-house person to rise in the ranks, so to speak, so that they would see me as somebody worthy of giving those opportunities to not only lead, but to work on the cool projects?
Man, I don't know, because, so I'll tell you this. When we started talking about seriously doing a rebrand, the CMO and my boss, head of marketing of my department, we started shopping around, which was super fun. Like, what branding agency do you want to work with? And we met with Brian Collins, and we met with Richard Turley, and I was just like, we're just going to go see all the great people. We ended up working with Paula Scher for a minute. And she said, and I thought this was great, she was like, the problem with rebrands is that, we can make all these decisions, but we don't know the organization intimately enough to understand all the different applications, which is why the way she likes to work is have someone like me on the inside. We work together so that she can kind of start to come up with this general stuff. And then I can help figure out how that would all get implemented, or that would all apply to the number of different things you need to do. I think one of the issues with brand guidelines in general is that they're either so prescriptive that there's no way an internal team is allowed to iterate on it.
Right.
Or they're not prescriptive enough, and the ways that they iterate on it don't achieve what those brand guidelines were supposed to do. And so I thought that was a really great process. She also doesn't want to do, marketing collateral. That's not what she's trying to do. She's trying to develop a look and feel for this brand, and empower designers with the tools to make cool things with it. And there's a lot of gaps, in that process. I think when if you look at brand guidelines that get released, check back in with those brands like a year later. What is that internal team doing with them? So I guess to answer your question, we didn't end up going through with that project because politically they decided it wasn't the time. But being the person on the inside who knows that brand inside and out, not for all of the bureaucratic hiccups that are involved, but all of the different ways you're going to apply that brand, and being the ambassador for that brand is probably the best way to make yourself indispensable to both the internal team and whatever external agency they end up hiring.
I think, if I may opine on this, because I've had to struggle with this before, where I've brought in creative directors from the outside and not internally, and the team. I brought in a woman to lead the team, and there were at that point 3 dudes who worked for me as designers, and I knew it was going to be tough for them to swallow. So I had to figure out how to do this. And so I think in lots of things, if you drop change on people suddenly, no matter who you are, it's kind of difficult. It is very difficult to make that hard 90-degree turn. So I remember the difficulties of doing that, and I know I needed to make this work. I needed them to be happy, to support her in her decisions, and for her to be able to work with the team and not get a bunch of dudes fighting back. And so we had a lot of meetings. We talked it over many times, and now luckily over the years, when I'm about to make a change, 6 months before I make that change, or 3 months, I'll tell the team, change is coming. It's going to look like this. And everybody starts to get warmed up to the idea. And what kind of concerns do we have? And so if it were me bringing you in, if I were the CMO, I would have a big old meeting with everybody. I'd say, guys, here's the thing. You're going to think Elizabeth is crazy. You're going to want to try and sabotage this. You're going to think, why shouldn't it be us who gets promoted? And I want to talk about that. And I'll tell you the reasons why I brought Elizabeth in, and give her an opportunity to talk to you about how things are going to be different. And this is what we need to be vital within this organization, so that design can play a more important role in the organization, as big as we are. And so tell them some of the thinking process. And if I'm not sure if that happened or not, but that's something, if you're in-house, definitely think about this. Change is difficult. Mitigate that by breaking it into smaller bite-sized pieces, and also let people in on the vision, the plan, the thinking that why are we doing this in the first place?
Yeah, I think in-house that can be hard because it's not inherently a design organization. So the people at the top who are making the decisions or holding the purse strings don't necessarily value design the way that, at an agency they would. It's often pulling teeth to get things to be different. So that communication definitely did not happen in my situation. And I don't think that the people who were in place had the vocabulary to understand the power of design or becoming a design-led company. I don't know how much interest there was in giving that much power to design. So the fact that it remained like informal and nebulous, ended up working against them across the board.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to say hello to Blaise, who's saying hello from Qatar and Sri Lanka. Hello, how's it going? People are talking in the chats there. Guys, I strongly encourage you to not fight with each other and try to listen to what's going on here and to start to formulate some really smart questions so that we can ask Elizabeth while we have her here. One of the questions, going back to the question about ever having to fire or hire, and then I think we got into some emotional stuff that was happening here.
Yeah.
Have you had to fire somebody?
I've asked certain freelancers not to come back.
Oh, that's okay.
And then, I think that's fine. And, but no, I never, of the 22 people, I didn't fire anybody. No, I've never fired anybody.
Really?
No.
Now, I'm going to probably paint myself as a dark-hearted person, but part of managing change is to manage some people out that don't fit within the new vision. And you have resources. You have 22 people. And I bet it's like the reason why the military has special forces. If you had 6 people who got you, who knew what to do, you could probably do the work of 50 people or more. And so what I would do is like, okay, I need to make room for that because they did bring me into the organization to make some changes. We want to get alignment on what the change should be. But once I know what that is for upper management, for the C-suite, I'm going to go and I have to make some changes because truthfully, you're not doing anybody any favors. This is my philosophy. By keeping them in this whole machine for 2 decades, if they're not going to grow. People need to grow. It's like a fundamental thing. Like we need to grow in all ways. Otherwise, we're dying. So I would try to help people find other opportunities or what might be a better fit.
Honestly, well, I didn't, because my co-creative director was kind of in charge of the people management. And I was grateful for that. She had relationships with those people that I didn't have. Ultimately, the last time we were on the show, we were talking about aging in graphic design in a career. And the idea of letting go people who had been there for a long time, who relied on this job for their livelihood, they were not going to be able to walk out of that job and walk into another design job.
Really?
They didn't have contemporary skills that would apply to other organizations. People aren't hiring 55-year-old designers who don't know how to, make digital products or who have never, I'm not saying this to disparage. I'm actually saying this because ultimately I would rather get whatever I can out of that person and let that person retire. Like, it's just graphic design. Like, I don't want to mess with somebody's retirement. I don't want to mess with someone's ability to pay their mortgage when they're older. Like, I did not want that response.
I want to talk about this. Wow. You are actually a very empathetic person. I like your attitude about this. I mean, was this person like 2 years away from retiring? Is that the case? Or like 15 years?
He'd been there since I was 6.
Okay, so that's one of those people. Okay.
Yeah, and that's one of them. There were several of them who'd been there for 20 years or something. And I was just like, I know how hard it is, for designers who have a lot more under their belt to find jobs. It's so competitive. And so, But,
okay, I have to weigh in here a little bit. I think it's a failure of the organization. I'm just going to say this, and I don't even know the organization. When you have people who now don't have marketable skills, who are just there because they can't go anywhere else, and that's a reflection on both the employee and the organization in which they work in. That something that we talk about here a lot, and Jonah, you can tell me I'm a liar in a second, is that I always tell people, like, our relationship together, I hope it lasts a really long time, but we should not anticipate that it's going to last forever. My responsibility as the owner and as your boss and as somebody who wants to mentor you is to make sure you leave here much stronger than you came in. And where I'm constantly pushing the team to say, like, you know what? Don't go into cruise control because the market keeps moving. Don't just slip into that coma and just be complacent, because you will ultimately pay the price. And there's so many things that are out of my control, market forces, our direction, like, do customers even want to buy what we make, that one day I might just come to you like, guys, I'm closing up shop. I could get hit by a truck tomorrow. And I would want to make sure that each person here can go out and get a better job than the one that they had. And when people leave us, and they leave us all the time, I say, good luck, God bless, good for you. And I never want to be the person who gets in the way of somebody doing better. On the opposite side, which is, why aren't we creating more relevant, creative people within the organization? Because then now we're all dying together. It's just, we had a guest on yesterday, her name's Ariel, and she said that there are the hospice workers, and it was a label that she put on people, right? That they're just maintaining the corpse, like, before it's dead. And I feel like that's what's happened here, where there's a space that's safe, but they're not really growing. And they're just, I just feel like they're just coming into the office, collecting a paycheck and thinking about retirement.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you, as being in charge of those people, you've taken the responsibility at the outset for them. And I think that should be the way that is managed. But that guy has also been through a merger. Right. How many people in charge? No one person took responsibility for even him, for his the trajectory of his career. And of course that should have been his responsibility, but it's too late. Like, and I wasn't going to be the one, right? Like, it wasn't that important to me. And also it wasn't my decision.
Right.
Thank God.
Okay, we have two really good questions right now, and I'm going to try to get more questions in. So, Elizabeth, I won't say anything. If you can just be super like, boom, here it is. I'll try to knock this out because I think they're all here. They're leaning in at this point, okay? So, Bien is asking, Elizabeth, what strategies did you use to develop camaraderie and establish trust and leadership coming into a new team? We touched on this a little bit. I'll give you another shot at it. What did you do?
What I did then and what I do now are totally different.
Okay, why don't you just give us the good advice then?
Yeah, what would you do now?
Yeah, what would you do now? Now that you've learned all this stuff.
One of the things I think I did and do right are, I don't use the word subordinate. I will take good ideas from anyone. I am happy to roll up my sleeves and do the same grunt work as anybody. So I try to establish from the beginning, not a flat structure by any means, but a respect for what everybody does. Making type edits in a PDF, I'll do that if no one else has time. Like, I don't care. I'm not precious about that. And that's important to me because I want people to count on me, and for me I want them to understand that I respect everybody's role. So I think I did that right, as much as I could, with the exception of the guy who screamed at me. But we ended up, getting along really well because I'm willing to own my mistakes. I'm so willing to say I'm sorry and move on. It's one of the things I learned at my first job. The quickest way to mitigate an F up is to own it and say, what can I do to solve it? Or here's some solutions.
I agree.
Let's stop the blame game. Let's stop the resentment right now. We're in this together. I'm happy to do that. I would rather do that. That's my desire. I think I was also at the time, I was responding to what my boss was telling me to do, even though I didn't agree with it. Like, I don't manage people that way, and I didn't want to manage people that way. And I did it her way anyway. And I wish that I hadn't. So she's very like bring the hammer, and because
Right.
I totally happy to like fight, I would do that with her, but it wouldn't have been my approach. So I think I would have tried to have a lot more sessions where we were working together on things, which is hard to do when you've got 22 designers. And I don't even remember how many, like the peak project flow was like crazy. You know, there were hundreds of projects going on at a time.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it was overwhelming.
Very good. Okay, next question. Here we go. Joe's asking this question. Something that I've always thought about in graphic is graphic design a young person's game? I mean, if you don't progress to art direction or creative direction or management, where do you go? I think this is a question that's teed up just for you.
I think it's a great question. I have a really good friend who I hired at the bank for a while, and he was by my side, and he's a really good designer. But he doesn't really care about titles and stuff. He'd actually rather do the work than manage people. So they are two different things, you know, doing the work and running a team are different skill sets. You know, it's really different. So not wanting to be a creative director, I think is fine. I think the reason a lot of people do it or become art directors or try to progress is because they need more money. And, you know, a mid-weight graphic designer isn't going to be able to command the same amount of money as, you know, maybe an art director or creative director, design director. So right now, you know, our last conversation was about how, like we're setting ourselves up for graphic design being a young person's game. And I don't know how that's going to play out, you know. I don't know.
Okay. I'm trying to read the next question here. Jonah, did you see anything in the comment section? And I think we're going to need to wrap up pretty soon here.
I did not, but I'm just trying to chime in
Okay.
from the working for free versus personal growth kind of thing.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Wait, formulate that into...
No, there's something,
Is there something in here?
some discussion going on in the chat right now.
Okay, I didn't see it, so I want to keep it on. Okay, I can ask a generic question while I scan for other questions to ask you, which is, there are probably fewer people who are going to watch this and say, yep, I'm Elizabeth, I'm jumping into a company, I'm going to go inside the brand, and I now know how to deal with this. More likely, it's going to be a person on the inside already who's got questions about either how do I make peace or how do I make the new hire, the new creative director, be an ally? How can I support them? How can I grow? What tips would you give to them then?
It's kind of what I said before. It's about being an ambassador for the brand in terms of how it applies. No one can know that
I see.
better than you can if you've got some time and experience with that brand. What you can also do is come with what you would like to do if you were given the power to do it, and discuss that with that creative director and see what their thoughts are. You know, I think, you know, if you're interested in the brand and you're not totally sick of those brand fonts and you want to keep going, get that person to teach you how to keep going with the tools that you've got. You know, that can be one of the really hard things, is like, I've been using these, you know, these fonts and these colors for so long, I don't have any new ideas, you know. So getting that person to share with you what they would do, where you think the limitations of the brand are, what you would do if you were in charge, all of those things help to create a dialogue that that empowers you as a creative. It makes you indispensable to that creative director because you know something they don't know.
Right. I'm going to do my best job to suck up to you right now, okay? I'm going to pretend I'm in-house. Yeah, go on. My whole thing would be like, first we try to like get a meeting with you somehow, right? So you're brand new, you come into the agency or the brand, and I would come up to you. I'm like, Elizabeth, I'm so happy that you're here. You're going to bring in a lot of fresh energy. I've looked up some of your work, and it's radically different than what we do here. If you ever need help in terms of understanding how the systems have worked in the past, not that I'm married to them, I'd be more than happy to be an ally for you to let you know where things are, who does what here, and so that you can make the best decision, because I would love to see you be successful in what you're doing. I'm behind it. I may not have all the skills that you want of me, and I'm willing to learn.
Yeah, 100%. We had one designer who we used to call her hot shit. Okay. Hot shit, aren't you?
Yeah.
And like, maybe.
Okay. And, it's a good name.
She was great. And she had that openness. She was not resentful. She would just, I mean, I was not as chill as she is at her age at all. I had way too much ego wrapped up in like, why is someone changing my work? You know, I wanted it to be this way and they're making it a different way. She didn't care. She would change it. She would ask questions. She would put her head down. And she ended up being like such an invaluable resource to me, not because she did things my way, but because she would take one nugget of feedback and show me 5 different ways of doing that. And so it saved me time. It showed the breadth of her creativity.
Yes.
It showed that she was willing to like try things. She would ask me questions about type, you know, and I always try to pepper everything in with a little lesson. I've been doing this for 17 years. Like I've worked in all kinds of situations. So I want to share that, you know, it's just sitting in my brain. And she said, she left my office one day and she goes, man, I learned something from you every time I come into your office. I was like, great. She was wonderful.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. I have a question, or not a question, a comment, and I really want you to just unleash on this and give us your full-throated opinion on this. And then I have a little discussion on the chat that I need to address, okay? So here we go. Mars is saying, realistically, you're not going to be growing massively in your 50s. Please respond.
What's the comment? You're not going to be growing
You're not going to be growing massively in your 50s.
Yeah, I mean, probably not. That's the scary thing, right? Like, do I want to go take a class in any new software? Not really. But it seems like that's the only advice we've got for older people. I don't know, man. Like, what am I going to do in my 50s? I don't know. That's 9 years from now. And, you know, a lot of people go the way of having their own studio because at least there's no limit to their earning potential. At least they can be in charge and not have a boss who's, you know, 20 years younger than them, like some of my coworkers had. I don't know what the answer is aside from there are so many opportunities now to diversify your own income by using your creativity. So many people, young people, old people, start these little side hustles of things that they want to be doing anyway. And they start to supplement their income with those things. And I think that that's the way forward. I think that's what you've done, Chris. You know, you started doing something that was not just studio work every day. Right. It was educating people. It was sharing your talents. It was sharing your knowledge. And it was, you were learning more through doing that. And I don't know any other way to do it. You know, someone, when this came up on Twitter, and some young designer started talking about, well, I'll do that as my retirement job. And I said, what's a retirement job? When my dad retired, he took over my brother's paper route. Fine, but that didn't pay the mortgage. Like, I don't know what a retirement job is, but if you think you're going to walk in and get VP of design at a big institution that you've never been at before when you're 55, I don't think that's going to happen. Like, you have to, there's levels to getting up to that point, and it's not a retirement job.
You are crushing my dream. Elizabeth, you surprised me with your answer. I thought you were going to take this a very different way. Now, I am a couple years your senior. I'm about to hit 50 myself. And I was like, F you, Mars. Screw you. Who says maybe you won't grow massively at 50, but I will say this now. Age is a number. If you work hard every single day to stay relevant, to be conversant in what's going on in the world, you're up on culture, your age actually is a benefit. I had a gentleman come here the other day, And he works in the agency world, like advertising agency. And he says, Chris, do you know if this doesn't work out for you in the future, you can command like any job you want out there in the world right now, because you're exhibiting so many things. Like, you know how to manage and run creative teams. You're a creative yourself. You know how to communicate that. You know how to make content and media. And I feel like today I'm growing more than I have ever grown in my life. And I remember back when I was in my early 20s, we had a professor, his name's Roland Young, an older Chinese man who sat there and taught us conceptual thinking. And he would always dress in the same clothes, black sweatshirt, black sweatpants, and white sneakers. And he just looked like a frail man. But he would come in there and he would just say the craziest things. And I felt embarrassed for all of us 20-year-olds, because we weren't thinking radically enough, that there was an old man, I think maybe at that point he was in his 50s, saying radically just crazy avant-garde ideas about art and design, and we just looked like idiots. So yeah. I'm just saying that to people. Yes, you can go down that path where you put it into cruise control and you just disappear into obsolescence, but that's a choice, and that's your choice. My only thing is my body is becoming more frail and maybe my memory isn't as sharp, but I know so much more today than I did just 30 years ago. I'm reading more. 100%. I'm talking to incredibly interesting people like yourself and people on the fringes doing exciting things, and I get to pull all that stuff in. When I was in my 20s, I was just too busy doing the work. So that was my response.
Well, and that's what I mean about like, you're not, what I took that to mean was like, if you're just still doing whatever graphic design work in your 50s, I don't know how much you're expanding your brain.
Right. You have not grown.
Doing these things where you're exploring and you're coming up with radical ideas, that is a ton of growth. Polish Hair actually has a pyramid. I think it's called like the pyramid of power or the steps of power. You should look it up online. And she has it by each decade of age. 20s, you're just kind of like just gonna go to it. You should look it up instead of me paraphrasing it. But 40s are like power, 50s are like chief power, and it's because of that same thing. Your ego has been mashed in all the ways that it's going to be mashed, and now you're free to actually think and explore and fail, in a way that you can't when you're younger, because you're afraid and you don't know enough. You don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Whew. All right. We have a few minutes left here, and I'm going to do the recap in just a second if I can. I'm going to try. But there's this conversation that sparked all over the place because of some of the things that we talked about. How one person is saying, don't blame the company when they fire you because you didn't take any risk. You should take responsibility for your own growth. And somebody else is saying, well, having an organization that helps you to learn and to grow is an expensive thing. I completely 100% disagree. It's a cultural thing. If you bake into the time of people who work in the company, you must spend 5% of your time, 10% of your time exploring, reading, learning, and you create a budget for them to go to seminars that they want to, or you buy tools and resources to help them. These are very small costs. And this is not, to me, an expense if it's used well. This is an investment because that person comes back to the organization smarter, more efficient, more productive, just renewed energy. I think especially because a lot of these corporations, especially these really big corporations, that's a tiny investment that you can make in the most important resource that you have, the humans that work for you, who choose to give you their time, energy, and their brain. That's the minimum you could do. All right.
I agree.
Thank you.
I think a lot of them do. Our organization paid for things like conferences and stuff. Mm-hmm. But then it's up to the designer to take advantage of that. And, not everyone does.
Yep. Okay. Are there any last questions or comments or ideas that you want to bring up? Because I know you had a couple ideas. Did we get an opportunity to talk about them, or is there something that you want to finish on?
Yeah, we talked about, I think this was great. I think the one thing I was like, God, I wish I had Chris's audience right now sometimes to say, really think about if you're on the studio side or the agency side and you develop brand guidelines, mm-hmm. Really think about finding that ambassador in-house. Like bring that up as a point of necessity in what you build, because your work will get thrown away immediately if it's not applicable by, to the designers who are going to use your stuff. So I think that was a huge revelation for me. And I will from now on, if I get more branding projects, I will always try to find the people who are going to use that brand, interview them, and bring them along with me.
Mm-hmm. And as of Monday next week, you're officially back to being freelance again.
Yeah, studio and everything.
What do you look forward to the most?
I already have some good projects lined up. The thing I'm number one looking forward to the most is not using those fonts that I worked for 20 months.
No more gold for a little bit. No more fonts. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's a great answer. That's a fun, light way to end our live stream together. I'm going to just be honest here. I'm going to do an okay job of recapping this because I was reading comments and responding to you. And here we go, guys. Here's the recap before we say goodbye to Elizabeth. Okay, a couple of things. One is when you are in-house, one of the big advantages is you get to collaborate with people that you can't normally afford. So use that opportunity. Use it to try new ideas and to push the boundaries. Hopefully you get buy-in. And it's also very important for you to have that person higher up who supports your ideas and your drive. The other thing that I thought was really great was when you're in the driver's seat, and as you were in the freelance world, you were able to be honest about your expectations and your needs. So when you're being recruited, you could say, no, this doesn't sound right. And so they keep coming back with you with more and more and more. And a good way to step away from your freelance independent business is to do some kind of trial phase, which is what Elizabeth did. They got to know each other and said, oh, maybe I can do this. And it gradually increased over time. It's a great way for you not to shut down your shop and walk away from your clients without knowing what you're getting into. So that was great. We already mentioned having an advocate for you at the C-level suite. And I think one of the big takeaways here, whether you're in-house or out-house, is a brand and a brand guideline is more than just logo, color palette, and typefaces, because in the hands of a bunch of different people, there's many different expressions that could be completely off-brand. One suggestion that a viewer made was, when you deliver a brand guide, you should do like a 360 campaign for it or something like that, just to test how it breaks and then to design for that.
Yeah.
We talked about this, like once you're on the inside, this is one of the best things about being in-house. Now you don't have to worry about what the client's going to say. You should use that to your advantage to try ideas and to kind of push the boundaries. I think it's safe inside as long as you do it in a respectful way. Here's one of her tips. So this was a side tip. This is the bonus part of this live stream, which is how to work with photographers. The best tip she ever got was have a clear vision, communicate it, and then get out of the way. Just get out. Let them do their job. Don't micromanage it. And one of the biggest things is whether you're the person who's being affected by this or you're the person creating the change, is you want to make sure that you align the creative teams, get the culture together, like have a conversation about it. And one of the mistakes that she made was, I want to see what everybody's good at. And inadvertently, she did something that they interpreted as, we have to prove ourselves to you. And that's probably something that she didn't intend to do. Guys, today joining me was Elizabeth Carey Smith. You guys can check her out at the original ECS, Elizabeth Carey Smith, ECS. Remember that. You can also check out her work. And I guess now you're open for clients again. So go to elizabethcareysmith.com, unless that's changed. Has it?
No, there's actually work on there now too.
Oh, there's work now. Okay, it's a lot easier to check out. Before it was like a big PDF that you had to download, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so guys, that's it. Elizabeth, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Round of applause, guys. Yeah. Okay, that's it for us. And I have some music here. Where is it? There it is.